I want to talk today. Have you seen this flag before? Has anyone seen it? Who can tell me what country it's from? No one? Who thinks they know? Queensland? It might very well be very soon. It's the flag of Mozambique. Mozambique's a large country. It's got 32 million people. It's one of the only countries' flags in the world that has a machine gun in it. It's actually the only flag in the world that has a machine gun in it. And as crazy as that symbol might seem, it's actually a story that's being told on the picture of that flag. Mozambique was colonized back in 1970. It was actually taken over by the Portuguese. This is a big, long history story I'm going to condense in a very small packet. But it was taken over by the Portuguese, and they ran it. And in 1970, the people of Mozambique rose up and said, we want our independence. And so they got it. And 2 years later, in 1972, they decided that they were going to fight for independence. And so there was a bloody war that started to rampage throughout Mozambique for the next 15 years from 1977 to 1992. So 15 years that went on for. And so a group of Christians at the end of the war, in conjunction with a bunch of other artists, so the next picture can come up, thanks guys, then there's a bunch of artists that got together and made this here. And these guys were part of a huge conglomerate of art that was made across Mozambique. This is called the Tree of Life. So it's taken from the book of Genesis, made by a bunch of Christians. Around the bottom there you can see there's a peacock over here and there's a couple of birds and things like that all floating around there, which has just been made as a whole symbolism of God's hope to bring life back into the nation out of something that was quite detrimental. It stands about 10 feet tall, and this is an image of flourishing life that can come forth out of something that was dead. The interesting thing that the book of the book Genesis has the tree of life, but also does the book of Revelation. In chapter 22, in the second part of it, it talks about the tree of life, and the leaves that are in that tree, are on that tree, are come to bring blessing to the nations. John's vision was that vision of telling that story. This tree of life right here is a symbol of hope, a symbol of God's life being restored and renewing vision back into its nation. The interesting thing about this, you probably can't see it so clearly on that picture, but that tree and all the animals and pieces of art around it is made from machine gun pieces that were used during the war to destroy the people. Every piece in there is a machine gun piece that was used during the wars of independence. And it's made entirely out of things that were used for killing people. And these bunch of Christians told a powerful imagery through bringing the tree of life to life using those things. You see, it's because of the resurrection of Jesus and the gospel of where God's taking our world that picture is possible. These people saw a hope in something that was meant to bring death. And the story of the Bible is a story of life and a story of hope. And we've been talking about this symbolizing everything going through in our world over the last few weeks. We've been talking about Genesis 1 to 11, how it fell apart. But today we're going to look at Genesis 37 and the story of Joseph. And I'm going to read a little bit. So it says in Genesis 37:1, it says, Jacob lived in the land of his fathers sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. So a quick recap. Remember, Genesis 1 to 11, the world went to hell in a handbasket. God created Adam and Eve, and everything just went to hell pear-shaped really quick. Remember that? 11 chapters. Everything got destroyed. And the world's falling apart. So the last time we talked about God's rescue plan was a new family. Where did it end? Where did the new rescue plan started with who? No. Chapter 12. Terah's son. Who was Terah's son? Abraham. Thank you, Linda J. Abraham was the new plan. He was the new line that God was breathing in to mankind. And the blessing started with Abraham and then went on to Isaac and went on to Jacob. Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. Israel means struggles with God. Ha! It means it struggles with God. That's, we all want to look at Israel. They're constantly struggling with God. That's their name means that. The question is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are they good or bad guys? Are they good or bad? Yeah, come see, come sa. One guy lied to Billy-O about his wife being his sister 2 times. 2 times. Another guy lied about who he was and stole his brother's birthright. These are the people that God was using. The new timeline for those Loki fans once again. Some people are sitting, who the heck is Loki? Just look at something on TV. But there's this timeline that is flowing now that God is walking through. The whole point when we read the book, when we read the stories in the Bible, is that they struggle to have faith and they make a lot of really dumb decisions. Yeah. They make a lot of dumb decisions, these guys. And Jacob even, his name Jacob means deceiver. Israel struggles with God and he's a total chump. He's just, you think about Jacob and everything that he did. He didn't listen to anybody. Even when he was told, don't go out and meet your brother, what did he do? He went out and met his brother and tried to bribe him because he wanted to do it his own way. And he was told, don't do it. And that's when he has the fight with God and his hip gets touched and everything happens. So he's a cheat and a liar and God sticks with him. Now, does God approve of this behavior? No. But he is committed to working out his salvation, even in the midst of stubborn, stupid humans. God is committed to this plan. It's good news. It's good news for us. Remember that. I don't know about you, but I find it really good news when I stuff up that I know that God's plan of salvation is still at work in my life. So why would God hang out with these guys? Why would he even want these people as part of his lineage, as part of the line? So remember, God gave salvation to us so that we can give these guys a break right now. When I read these stories and I think of Darren Nosworthy, I go, you know what? I'm just going to leave these guys alone. I'm not going to think about how stupid they are and how bad their decisions are. Yeah? A lot of nodding going on here this morning. Right here in Genesis is our story. See, the book of Genesis is our story. It's our mistakes. So Jacob has a bunch of kids. One of them's called Joseph. And who's Joseph to Jacob? His favorite, isn't he? The Bible tells us that. So verse 2 of chapter 37, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Things get really complicated here. You know, this Jacob has now had a huge family, and so I don't know, huge families tend to have a lot of stuff going on, and little families, you don't have to have a big family to have problems going on, do you? You can have a small family to have huge problems, but this Jacob guy, he has 4 wives. The interesting thing is Abraham had a wife and a concubine, and Jacob had 4 wives. Isaac, there's no record of him having anyone other than Rebekah. He just has his one. Isaac was sort of like we actually could make it with this guy. This guy, and then Jacob came along. And that stuffed up the whole thing. And so there's a thing up here of all the wives. So here they are. There's his 4 wives, if you're not sure who they were. But there they are, and they're the sons that came with them. And so at the very end was who? Who was his favorite wife? Who was his favorite son? How would you be if you were those other 3? I'm pretty jealous, eh? Just because it's in the Bible, though, just because all this is in the Bible, doesn't mean it's right. Just because it's in the Bible doesn't make it right. Does God approve of this? No. It's most likely, whenever we see these things, that these things are there for us to look at and criticize and go, what's God doing in this moment? So Jacob takes 4 wives and we see the family just totally disintegrate. And his favourite wife is Rachel, which we talked about. His favourite son is Jacob. And if you've seen Joseph in the Technicolor coat, that's probably the closest you'll get to thinking of what it was like. If not, look up Andrew Lloyd Webber. He's probably got the best description of it. And any high school that's done it in the years, you'll see them in their photos. But he makes this robe for Joseph. And what does this favouritism do for Joseph? Alienates him, makes him an arrogant little snotty-nosed brother. Doesn't it? It affects his character, because you look at what happens after verse 2. He brings a bad report to his father. The word bad report there is the same word used in Proverbs, that it's a gossip. He brought slander back to his dad about his brothers. He was like, hey, Dad. That was like me. I've got 2 older sisters, and they often say I was the spoilt one of the family. As true as that is, I still turned out more perfect than they did. And I know they watch this online, so now we wait for all the texts. So his brothers, they can't speak a kind word to this little punk. You know, like, can't you understand this? They just cannot be nice to him, and his character is revealed in the next part of the story. In verse 5, it says, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered down and bowed to mine. And he says, this is what he's doing. He goes, what do you think about that? Honestly, that's what he's doing. And he's saying, what do you think about this? Mine's all upright and straight, and yours are flopping down, bowing to me. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of this dream and what he had said. Verse 9. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream. At this time, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in his heart. Something I'm finding when biblical authors go this way, when they want us to see something, they don't actually say, dear reader, watch what happens here. I need you to pay attention. They tell us a story that draws us in. You ever watched a movie that suckers you in, and you start watching it and you go, I'm going to go to bed in a minute, and you still watch the first 5 minutes and it's that good of the story, it sucks you in. That's what the authors are doing right here. They say, listen to what, they don't say, pay attention to what I'm about to say. They say, here's a story. Follow this. They tell a story and they draw in to share and challenge and teach us about things about God and about ourselves and how we look at things. So where's God in the story so far? Has he been mentioned even yet? Nope. So far it's a story about a very dysfunctional family. That's exactly what's happening here. We're seeing a picture of a very dysfunctional family. Now his brothers, in verse 12, had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring the word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron, and when Joseph arrived in Shechem, I love this little piece. This is great storytelling. He goes, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing? It sounds just like a little storybook, doesn't it? Who looked for this? And then it just goes on. There's nothing this guy's never referred to ever again, but it was just like life. I'm lost, and he goes, oh, look, I just seen them. They're over here. "They've moved from here," he said. The man answered, "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Just a little part of the story I just like. It's just this little bit where it's got like an extra in a movie. Like, it just doesn't need to be there, but it's there. And it's like Joseph's life just moves on. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns." And that, not a toilet cistern, because that's really tiny. Think of a big well. So cisterns say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this because he wanted to come and rescue him later. Put Reuben in the picture. What order was he in the family? He was the oldest. Who's going to cop the flak? The oldest. Of course he's thinking to himself, "You know what, let's just hide him. I'll go back, rescue him, and I'll be the hero because I'm the older brother." And it goes on and says this in verse 23 of 37. "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, so there was no water in it. And as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up. Hey, look, guys, look who's coming. A caravan of Ishmaelites are coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, 'Aha! What will we gain if we kill our brother? Why don't we sell him? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother. Come on, snotty-nosed as he is, let's we'll just do the right thing.' His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt." Let's just stop. Stop. So what's the big picture here again? Why do we care about these people? Why is this something important for us? Because remember, Genesis 1 to 11, God had a plan for man to be with him. Man messed it up. He started again with Abraham. So who's Abraham's family that we should care? Who's Abraham's family that God's going to save these people through? A bunch of two-faced murderers, for starters, we're looking here. They intended to kill him. That was their intention, to kill him. And so has God yet been mentioned in the story? Does that mean God's not at work? No. God is silent in the story so far, but he's not absent. He is silent. He's just watching. Chapter 39, let's go over there. We won't do 38, it's pretty R-rated, so you need to read that yourself. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, to Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. He brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So you're 17 years old. Think about this. You're 17 years old. You've been kidnapped, sold into slavery by two slave traders and taken to a country you don't know. You don't know their language. You don't know how to talk. And now you've been sold into the captain of the military's home. How do you feel about life right now? How do you feel? My life's over. I'm pretty sure that he was going, what the heck? Verse 2 of 39, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted his care and everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord, who? The Lord did what? Blessed him, prospered him. Wasn't that the promise to Abraham? Remember what he said to Abraham? He said, I will bless you and the nations from you. So we're already starting to see the nations being blessed through Joseph. Through your family, he said, will flow to the nations, the blessing. It's happening, it's spreading, it's spreading. Remember, the virus of sin was spreading. God came up with an answer with Abraham to bring salvation and righteousness and let it spread. And here it is beginning to spread. It goes on in verse 5. He blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. All of the given scenarios, you're a slave in a foreign country, you're trying to learn a new language, and so far things are going pretty good, right? So far things are going pretty good. God meets you there. God's met him. He's blessed him. Things that God, this is pretty good. He's met him. Does God solve all of his problems? He's still a slave. You never get back to his family. Does God intervene and teleport him back to his dad? That would be cool, but no. Really cool story, but no. He doesn't. But he meets him in the midst of his very dark time in his life. He meets him right there in the darkness of his life. Again, the author is giving us a clue to how God is at work in the world. He's giving us a clue as to how God works in people. Remember the Strangers video clip? He's at work in people. Again, the author is showing us that God is at work, weaving his story of salvation. Who's responsible for Joseph being in this situation? His brothers. His brothers put him there, didn't they? His brothers kidnapped, they sold him. Does God want that? Does God want him to be a slave? No, of course he doesn't. The enemy wants the sin to be the ruler, but God goes, I'm going to wipe it out. And it's no longer going to rule and control. Because remember, we're all heading towards a point where this all comes to an end. If you look on Facebook, some people say it's tomorrow. Me not think so. Because some of the words people use out there, I would hate to stand before God right now. Again, we are being shown how God works. 39 to 5 and 6 says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. Probably modeled a little bit off me. Interesting thing that authors of the Bible very rarely refer to the looks of people, unless it's pertinent to the plot. Was this pertinent to the plot? Oh, absolutely. After a while, his master's wife took notice. You don't take notice of somebody who is not looking hot. True? Oh, I'm sorry, we can't think that way about people in the Bible. Joseph would have been on the Vogue magazines and all that. I'm pretty sure, by the way this is going. Come to bed with me, she said. Woohoo! But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns is entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Now then, could I do such a thing, a wicked thing, he says, and sin against who? Sin against who? God. Not Potiphar. He says, how can I do this and sin against God? Does he say Potiphar? No. It would be true, wouldn't it, if he said it? But Joseph has got a bigger picture now. He's got a bigger view of things, and he says, how could I sin against God? Verse 10, and though she spoke to Joseph day after, can you imagine this? Day after, either she was really ugly or he had a really good handle on God. I'm going, he had a good handle on God. Because I don't think Potiphar would have just picked up anyone to be his wife. He would have been searching and going, But he refused to go to bed with her. or even be with her. The last time we heard words come out of Joseph's mouth was when? Talking about his dreams. And in his dreams, he brings a bad report. He brings gossip to his dad, the little punk kid. Remember that kid? And that little punk kid that we're encountering right now, this guy is a pretty changed man. He's changed. Something's changed in him. His integrity. He's a man of honesty. He's a man who wants to honor God with every part of his life and every part of his body. Something's happened to him. Again, the author's not going to tell us that God uses hardship to teach you a lesson. He draws you into the story. He's drawing us in. He's telling us the story. He says, look at this guy. Look, he's that snotty-nosed little kid. That one back in the paddock, that's him. This is the same guy now standing in front of Potiphar's wife going, I'm not going to sin against God. And he flees. God used the hardship in his life to chip away at the rough edges. He used them and do deep character work. Something I think God's at work at a lot at the moment. He wants our character to be shaped. Formation that may not possibly happen without conflict, without tragedy. When you go through something, it shapes you, doesn't it? Like the people of Mozambique, it shaped them. And they built a tree of life out of the things that destroyed many. The suffering that Joseph goes through are both the worst and the best things that have ever happened to him. Who's got that? I got stuff I've been through that are the worst. At the time it's the worst, but today it's the best things because it shaped me to be a person of character with God. And Joseph's story is us. It's embracing the paradox and the hardship that we go through in our lives. Yeah? One day he went into the house to attend to his duties and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. And when she saw, oh my goodness, I've got his cloak. And then he had run out and she's still holding it. She said, "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. And he came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed, woo!" When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And she kept this cloak beside her until her master came home. Then she told him the story. "That Hebrew slave you sent has come to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, 'This is how your slave treated me.' He burned with anger." This is not a guy you will tick off. This is not somebody you upset. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, what happens? While Joseph is there in prison, what happens in our minds when we read a scenario like this? Has God been mentioned yet still? Yeah, there was a little bit there where God favored him and his Lord was with him and he blessed him. Where's God? Did Joseph do the right thing? Did he do the right thing? Of course he did. In this scenario so far, he's done the right thing. Okay, he was a punk kid and maybe deserved some of the things that were coming his way. We get that. But did he have this coming? I don't think so. In my head, he's doing the most upright thing. To me, this would be a really godly man. If I met this guy, he'd be like, you would have him up on a pedestal, wouldn't you? He's doing the right thing, and he's even for the right reason, and he enters into the hardship of suffering again. Doing the right thing. Now, most of us, when this happens in our lives, we're looking, what's our first instinct? God's nowhere to be found. Is our first instinct. I've counseled that many people. Where's God in this? He's let go of the wheel. He's lost control. He's not a good God. We sang he's a good father this morning. I'm pretty sure some of you struggled with that. With what you go through. Is he really good? But here's a story showing us this very scenario. That's where we all go with it. Christian after Christian has always got this story, human being after human being. If you go out into the world and people go through tough times, you say God's a God of love. Where is he in this? And this is him weaving his story of salvation throughout man's story. But this story is precisely the opposite. It's the opposite of that. Things are not out of control. Things are working towards. We've got the benefit of reading the whole story, haven't we? But you and I sitting here right now, and what you're going through, don't have this benefit. But what you have is a story to show you God's weaving salvation throughout whatever you're going through. Now, who's responsible for Joseph getting into trouble? God? No. Potiphar's wife. She's the one. Her sin and her selfishness has put him there, but God can redeem it. God can use it. God can weave it into the story. He will take it and he will bring a tree of machine guns to be a tree of life, a message of hope. So he ends up in prison. Into verse 21 of 39, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. We've heard this story before, and every time he gets himself into hot water and things happen, and he's constantly there, but God's at work weaving behind the scenes. He's constantly there. This is his story. This is us. We're looking at us. This is a reflection. And what this story is trying to show us is that life is really ambiguous at times, isn't it? It really is. Wash your hands, don't wash your hands. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. When do I wear a mask? Do I wear a mask? Have I got an injection? No, I don't need an injection. I'm going to get an injection. I'm not going to get an injection. If you've had an injection, I'm not going to talk to you. If you haven't had an injection, I won't talk to you. It shows us the times we get into difficult scenarios that we face from time to time. We had a role to play in some of them. We're that snotty-nosed little kid that deserved what was coming. But we don't deserve everything that happened to us. But we do have a role to play in some of it. And you and I need to own up to that. What's my part? Because the one thing I know about God is working at salvation, he's also working on our character. And other times you had no role. Everybody wants to blame and say it's your fault. Husbands and wives are always blaming each other. Kids are blaming parents. Parents are blaming kids. Bosses are blaming staff. Staff are blaming bosses. Nobody wants to take responsibility and own up to their responsibility, but other times, there's times where we've had no role. And hardship and tragedy. Someone wrongs us, and we go down the path of where is God. And this story right here is saying, hold on. Just hold on a minute. Just because hardship hits you square in the face doesn't mean God's not around. Imagine if Joseph had the song Waymaker. He wrote the song. He is the song. There could be a bigger story at work here. And with Joseph, we get to see, as I said before, we get to see the story's completion. We don't have that luxury. We jump over to chapter 50, the last chapter of the book. And there's a bunch of crazy circumstances that happen, stuff goes on, and Joseph ends up standing before the king of Egypt. And when he does that and he saves, and while he's standing, the king gives him opportunity and he saves thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives from starvation through a great famine. And one day, who comes wandering in? His brothers. He reveals himself to his brothers and he gets his family to come down. His father moves back into town, and it's a real tear-jerker of a story if you read it. It's actually a really beautiful story. Eventually, Dad dies. And in verse 15, thanks guys, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave us this command. Therefore, before he died," they're right. Can you see this? They're right back. They haven't learnt. The brothers haven't learnt a thing. They're just going, let's cover all our bases and get a contract going here that Dad said, because, Joe's the favourite. We've got to make sure he's not going to kill us when we get into town. So Joseph says, please. So they say to Joseph, "Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you." So this is the message from the father. "And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." And their message gets back to Joseph, and what does Joseph do? He cries. He weeps. He goes, "These guys don't get it." It says in 16 and 17 that Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down and said, "Behold, we are your servants." What are they doing? They're bowing. They're bowing. They're bowing to him. But Joseph said to them, what do you think Joseph said to them? "Boom, boom, 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 gotcha! Told ya, I had you all over it all the time." No. The snotty-nosed Joseph would have done that. I'm pretty sure, I kind of think it might have fleeted. Ooh, I don't think so. Because the story goes on and says this. The very next verse, he says, "Do not fear. For I am in the place of God. As for you, you meant what you did to me for evil, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." There's a reason that this is right at the end of the book of Genesis. The author's saying, dear reader, if you haven't clued on right now, in that sentence right there is everything that this is about. Is God responsible for Joseph going through hardship? No, his brothers and Potiphar's wife. His arrogance. But was God working and weaving his salvation all the way through the book of Genesis to the story of bringing deliverance to the children of Israel? He says to his brothers, "You intended harm, but God is at work. He didn't allow your evil to destroy his plan ultimately." So whatever's going on in the world, whatever's going on in your life, if you keep looking at, obviously Joseph came to a point and said, "God, I'm yours. I'm yours." We're being invited by the author to take a look at how God is at work today. He's at work, folks. The minute you start to think he's lost control of the world, it's gone to hell in a handbasket, you're missing the whole picture here. God is still at work, bringing and weaving salvation to those in this world that are lost and broken and hurting, and to you, the things that you're going through. He's weaving his salvation if only you will trust him. It's not the view we would prefer. It's the view we prefer is the one in Exodus when the enemy comes and God goes, boom, and they're destroyed. Isn't that what we want? I hear churches calling out all the time, "Bring us revival, God, because revival makes me less responsible." God can do what he wants then. But he's wanting us to walk in character and trust him in the midst of this. Deliver the Afghani Christians. The Bible says, pray for those who are being persecuted. They will not fail. It doesn't say rip them out. It says pray that they won't give up. Why? Because the people that are there are going to watch them and see how they respond, and they will turn to Jesus. Then you may or may not have the luxury of finding out where the tree of life is being weaved in your life. I think of my dad, and he passed away. One of the last conversations I had with him 3 weeks before he died, so what's that, 7 weeks ago? I had the conversation with him, and he said, I often wonder if I've had an effect on people's lives. And he died thinking that. Because the day that he said that to me, I was able to say to him, Dad, I said, this much I know, is that you had an effect on my life to make me who I am. And Jesus, through the story of Joseph, has had an effect on me to make me the person who I am. Because he's weaving salvation through my life. This is the story of Genesis. It's like God the Bible lobs us this ball and goes, it's your turn to catch it. You've all been lobbed the ball this morning, whether you like it or not. You came into this building, and this message is lobbing you a ball. We have to choose whether or not we're going to take it. Whether we accept this view or not. Whether we accept that God's at work constantly. Whether we're going to boldly take a step of faith and say, God did it in Joseph's life, He can do it in mine. He did it in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. That was His story. That Genesis 1 right through to the resurrection of Christ is the message. Of life and hope. He has something in mind for my story. There is purpose. And I may never find out all of it. That everything I go through, we live in a world that demands to know, why? And yet God's going, maybe you might not find this out. See, this is so powerful. There are many, like Joseph in a prison today, there are people in a prison or a pit. People that we deeply love who are smashed into a pit. And we look at them and we go, what's going on? Where's God in this? And this story is not a trite story in the Bible. It's a story embracing the difficulty and the struggle that we all face. And it's just saying, will you boldly trust God? We sat down this week, my son, the youngest son, is, him, you've heard, I've referred to him a few times, and this week Janine was home and I pulled up from work and he was there with one of our food-eating friends. And we were sitting she was out the back and they were in this massive conversation, and it came up about the spirit realm and everything that was beginning to happen, and this young guy just began to open up, and the pain that he's gone through, the abuse that he's faced in his life, and the hurt, and we were just sitting there listening to this young man's story. And I was thinking about my message that I'm talking about, and here thinking, God, you're weaving in and out. This young man has come into our lives for a reason through my son, who's discovering Jesus again. He said to us the other day, one of the words he said was, I know God's got me, and He's got a purpose for me, Mum and Dad. Because God is weaving the work of salvation in people's lives. No matter what you go through, from somebody who didn't want to live to somebody today who's going, I know my purpose. People think that I'm a slacker, Dad, but I know God has a purpose for me, and it's about to happen. And he doesn't know anything. He's just making those statements because he feels it. I go, wow, God, you're at work. And so the ball that's been lobbed in your court is, will you boldly trust who's at work in ways, will you boldly trust God who's at work in ways that we're not sure of, like Joseph? Like the people who look at the machine gun tree of life, do they know that the hope that could be brought from that tree? Can you trust that he's doing something in your story and shaping and bringing a tree of life out of the death that you've been through? Can you trust that? I don't know today how this lands with you. And I don't pretend to know. I will not stand here today and go, this is what you should do, because you've got to let this ball land yourself. I can't make the decision for you. It's the summary of the book of Genesis. God's at work in our world. Where does this land with you? Where's God at work in your house? Where's he at work? Doesn't mean he's going to solve all your problems instantly. Trust me. If you think that, it's not going to happen. Or even the way that we would like them, but he's redeeming constantly. So I don't know again where this lands. But this is God's word to us as a community. He wants us to take that life that he's given us and trust him.